Get this fat creature away from my piano. Marquis Julian Vale seized Agnes Whitmore by the hair before the final note had faded. In front of ambassadors, officers, and the wealthiest families in England, he slammed the plus-size maid's face toward the keys and emptied a glass of red wine over her head. Laughter exploded beneath the chandeliers. "You played the wrong note," he hissed. "Tomorrow, you will apologize on your knees before every guest." Agnes's gentle face remained lowered, but her eyes moved across the open score. She had heard that composition hundreds of times. The note had not been wrong. Someone had replaced it, and 3 others, with marks written in fresh black ink. Then Agnes noticed something that chilled her more than Julian's threat. The 4 altered notes appeared precisely where the program listed the foreign ambassador's entrance, toast, speech, and departure. When she touched the wet ink, the Marquis stopped smiling. By tomorrow night, would those 4 notes become the signal for a murder? For one suspended moment, the ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Julian's fingers tightened in Agnes's hair. The amusement in his pale gray eyes had vanished, replaced by something sharp and calculating. He looked at the black stain on her fingertip, then at the open score. Agnes quickly lowered her hand. The laughter began again, scattered and uncertain. Lady Cordelia Vale, Julian's widowed mother, leaned back in her gilded chair and fanned herself as if the spectacle had become tiresome. "Do remove her," she said. "The smell of servants and cheap wine is ruining the evening." Agnes pushed herself upright. Her cheek throbbed where it had struck the edge of the piano. She was 32, full-figured and broad through the hips, with soft brown eyes and a face that appeared calm, even when fear was twisting through her stomach. That gentleness had always encouraged cruel people. They mistook silence for surrender and patience for stupidity. Julian released her with a shove. She caught herself against the piano before she fell. A few guests laughed louder, eager to please their host. Among them stood Lord Edwin Harcourt, an aging earl whose uniform was covered with medals. Beside him was Ambassador Alexander Petrov, the guest of honor for tomorrow evening's concert. Petrov did not laugh. The Russian diplomat watched Agnes with an expression she could not read. Then his gaze shifted toward the score. Julian immediately closed it. "You have embarrassed Vale House before representatives of the crown," he told Agnes. "If tomorrow's concert is anything less than perfect, I will see that you never work in another respectable household." Agnes looked at the wine spreading across her gray dress. "My lord, the notes on that page are beyond your understanding. They were not there this morning." The room fell quieter. Lady Cordelia's fan stopped moving. Agnes knew at once that she had said too much. Julian stepped close enough for her to smell the cedar and bergamot cologne on his collar. "Are you accusing a member of my household of altering a composition that has belonged to my family for generations?" "No, my lord. You just claimed the score was changed. I said only that those 4 notes were different." Different from what?" "From the music I heard yesterday." A woman in a silver gown covered a laugh with her gloved hand. "She dusts the instrument twice and believes herself a composer." More laughter followed. Agnes said nothing. Explaining that she had memorized the entire composition would only give Julian more reason to take the pages from her reach. For 9 winters she had polished that piano, arranged the music cabinet, and listened from the servants' corridor while masters from London rehearsed the Vale concerto. She knew when the strings should rise. She knew when the piano should fall silent. She knew the 17 seconds of stillness before the final movement. And she knew the 4 new notes did not belong. The ballroom doors opened. Mr. Silas Crowe, Julian's private secretary, entered carrying a leather dispatch case. He was a narrow man, with colorless hair, and a habit of flexing his left hand when nervous. He took in the overturned glass, Agnes's stained uniform, and the closed score. "The revised concert schedule, my lord," Crowe said. Julian held out his hand. "Leave it." Crowe placed a folded document beside the piano. As he withdrew, Agnes noticed a dark smear near the cuff of his left glove. It might have been ink, though she could not be certain beneath the golden light. Julian caught her looking. "Mrs. Bell," he called. The housekeeper hurried forward from the servants, gathered beside the wall. Mrs. Bell was a severe woman, who had spent 24 years ensuring that Vale House operated without disorder. She rarely displayed affection, but the distress in her eyes was unmistakable when she saw Agnes's bruised cheek. "Take her below stairs," Julian ordered. "No supper. No wages for this week. Tomorrow evening, she will kneel before the guests and apologize for her arrogance." Mrs. Bell hesitated. "My lord, Agnes was asked to play only because Monsieur Laurent failed to arrive, and she should have known that obedience does not require talent." The insult was followed by murmurs of approval. Ambassador Petrov finally stepped forward. "The maid prevented your rehearsal from ending in silence. Perhaps that deserves consideration." Julian smiled, but no warmth reached his eyes. "Your Excellency is generous. Unfortunately, generosity is why servants forget their place." Petrov's expression hardened. Before he could answer, Lady Cordelia rose and declared that the rehearsal would resume with the orchestra alone. Chairs scraped across the floor. Conversations returned. Within seconds, Agnes's humiliation became merely another entertainment to be discussed over wine. Mrs. Bell guided her toward the servants' door. As Agnes passed the piano, a draft from the open terrace lifted the corner of the revised concert schedule. She saw 4 handwritten instructions beneath the printed program. Ambassador enters. Ambassador receives the toast. Ambassador begins his address. Ambassador departs through the eastern gallery. Each line had been marked with a tiny musical symbol. The same 4 notes. Agnes slowed, but Mrs. Bell gripped her arm. "Keep walking," she whispered. "They are watching you." A violinist raised his bow. Julian reopened the score and placed it on the piano. Before Agnes crossed the threshold, she heard him speak softly to Silas Crow. "Find Laurent before midnight. And if he refuses to return?" Crow asked. "Then make certain he never explains why he left." The servants' door closed behind Agnes. The corridor beyond was narrow, cold and lit by a single oil lamp. Mrs. Bell released her only after they reached the stairs leading down to the kitchen. "You must forget whatever you think you saw," the housekeeper said. Agnes wiped wine from her eyelashes. "You know the score was changed." Mrs. Bell's face became pale. From inside her apron, she withdrew a small brass key and pressed it into Agnes's palm. Agnes recognized it immediately. It opened the locked cabinet where Vale House kept its oldest compositions, including the original handwritten copy of the concerto. "I know Monsieur Laurent did not leave because he was ill," Mrs. Bell whispered. "He came to me this afternoon. He was frightened." "What did he say?" "He said the concert was no longer music." A door slammed at the far end of the corridor. Heavy footsteps started down the stairs. Mrs. Bell closed Agnes's fingers around the key. "Go through the laundry passage. Reach the music cabinet before Julian destroys what is inside." Agnes turned toward the dark passageway, but the footsteps were already approaching. Then Julian Vale's voice echoed through the corridor. "Mrs. Bell, bring the maid back to me." Agnes closed her hand around the brass key, just as the handle of the corridor door began to turn. Mrs. Bell moved with startling speed, taking the stained cloth from Agnes's shoulder and thrusting it into her hands. "Lower your head," she whispered. "And whatever happens, do not speak of Monsieur Laurent." The door opened, and Marquis Julian Vale descended the final steps, with Silas Crow following a pace behind him. Julian had removed the pleasant expression he wore among important guests. In the servants' corridor, where no aristocrat could judge him, his face was cold and impatient. "I told you to bring the maid back," he said. Mrs. Bell bowed. "I was about to do so, my lord." Agnes slipped the key beneath the waistband of her uniform, pressing it into the folds of her apron. Julian stopped directly in front of her. Red wine still clung to her hair, and the bruise on her cheek had begun to darken, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her tremble. "What did you see on the concert schedule?" he asked. "Instructions for the ambassador's arrival, my lord." "And the symbols beside them?" "I could not read them clearly." Julian studied her gentle face. People had underestimated Agnes throughout her life because of that face, and her full, heavy-set figure. They saw softness, and assumed there could be nothing sharp beneath it. Julian had made that mistake for 9 years, but tonight suspicion had finally begun to disturb his certainty. "You claim to remember the old arrangement," he said. "How?" "I have heard it many times while cleaning the music room," Crow gave a dry laugh. Servants here plenty. Fortunately, they understand very little. Agnes glanced at his left glove. The dark mark near the cuff had disappeared. He had either cleaned the ink away or changed gloves before coming downstairs. Tomorrow, you will remain in the kitchen until you are summoned to apologize, Julian said. You will not enter the ballroom, the Eastern Gallery, or the music room. If I learn that you have disobeyed me, you will leave Vale House without wages or a reference. Yes, my lord. He leaned closer. And if you touch that score again, losing your position will be the smallest of your concerns. Julian turned and climbed the stairs, but Crow remained behind. His pale eyes settled on Agnes's apron, as if he could see the outline of the hidden key. Search her room, he told Mrs. Bell. His lordship wants every scrap of music removed. Agnes owns no music. Then the search will be brief. Crow followed Julian upstairs. Only when the door closed did Mrs. Bell breathe again. He knows you noticed something. Why did Monsieur Laurent come to you? Agnes asked. Not here. Mrs. Bell glanced toward the kitchen. Return to your duties. Behave as though tonight meant nothing. That was how life continued below stairs at Vale House. Humiliation did not excuse a servant from work. Within minutes, Agnes was carrying coal, polishing the wine from her dress, and helping prepare trays for the nobles who had laughed at her. Her cheek ached whenever she bent her head, yet she still noticed that Daisy Cole, the 16-year-old scullery maid, was hiding her left hand inside her skirt. Agnes found her beside the copper sink, crying silently over a deep burn across her palm. You should have told Mrs. Bell, Agnes said. Daisy shook her head. She'll send me home. My mother needs my wages. Agnes cleaned the wound with cool water and wrapped it in linen. Daisy had spilled boiling stock when laughter from the ballroom startled her, but she was more frightened of dismissal than of infection. Agnes took the 6 shillings she had saved for a new winter coat and placed them in Daisy's uninjured hand. Go to Mr. Pritchard's apothecary when the doors open. Ask for the salve in the blue jar. Daisy stared at the coins. But Lord Vale took your wages for the week, which means I already know how it feels to have none. I can't take this. You can repay me by keeping the hand clean. Agnes closed the girl's fingers around the money. Her old coat would have to survive another winter. It was not heroic, and no one upstairs would ever know, but kindness performed only when it was witnessed was merely another form of vanity. Near midnight, Nathaniel Brooks entered through the kitchen courtyard, carrying a basket of silverware from the garden pavilion. He was a junior footman with an uneven gait caused by an old injury to his right knee. Julian mocked him for it whenever guests were absent, but Agnes had never treated him as damaged. Months earlier, when he first arrived at Vale House, she had quietly rearranged the pantry shelves so he would not need to climb the ladder. He respected her, long before he had any reason to believe she possessed a remarkable memory. When Nathaniel saw the bruise on her face, his expression tightened. I heard what happened. The entire house heard. The entire county will hear by breakfast. The guests found it very amusing. He placed the basket down. Ambassador Petrov did not. Agnes remembered the diplomat watching her from across the ballroom. Did he say something? He asked who taught you to play. What did you tell him? The truth. No one did. Nathaniel paused, then lowered his voice. There's something else. I was stationed outside the Eastern Gallery before the rehearsal. Mr. Crow moved 2 of the ambassador's guards to the west entrance. He claimed the order came from Petrov himself, but the ambassador seemed surprised when he arrived. The Eastern Gallery lay directly beneath the balcony Agnes had noticed. Did you tell anyone? I told Mr. Crow the order made no sense. He said another question would cost me my position. Agnes looked toward the ceiling. Above them, the orchestra continued rehearsing the altered composition. The 4 strange notes drifted faintly through the floorboards, each one separated by a carefully measured silence. Julian's fortune had been shrinking for years. Agnes knew this because she had watched merchants leave his study unpaid and had seen household treasures disappear into locked carriages after dark. Yet tomorrow's concert would place him beside ministers, military officers, and foreign financiers. If Julian could present himself as the man who secured a new diplomatic agreement, he might gain the government appointment and loans needed to save Vale House. Whatever he planned, he needed the concert to proceed under his absolute control. Agnes had embarrassed him, but that alone did not explain the threat in his voice. He feared what she remembered. Mrs. Bell entered the kitchen carrying a ring of keys. Everyone to bed, she ordered. Her eyes found Agnes's for half a second before moving away. Agnes waited until Daisy and the other servants had left, then followed Mrs. Bell into the passage. "The original score," Agnes whispered. "Is it still in the cabinet?" "I do not know. Crow changed the lock 3 days ago. That brass key opens the older compartment behind it. But first you must reach the cabinet itself. Julian ordered my room searched, which is why the key cannot remain with you." Before Agnes could respond, Nathaniel stepped around the corner. "Give it to me," he said. "They have no reason to search a footman who cannot read music." Mrs. Bell stiffened. "You heard us?" "Enough to know she needs help." Agnes studied him. Nathaniel had risked his employment merely by listening. Asking him to carry the key could place him in greater danger. "No," she said. "You have a younger sister depending on your wages. And you just gave away your coat money to protect Daisy's hand. Don't tell me servants should only be brave when it costs nothing." Agnes finally placed the key in his palm. Nathaniel closed his fingers around it and turned toward the footman's quarters. A shadow moved behind the frosted glass at the far end of the passage. The door burst open. 2 estate guards entered, followed by Silas Crow. "No one moves," Crow said. He looked from Agnes to Nathaniel's clenched hand. "Marquis Vale has discovered that a key is missing from the music room." Then Crow pointed directly at Agnes. "Search them both." Nathaniel's fist remained closed as the 2 estate guards approached. Agnes could see the pulse beating rapidly in his neck, but he did not step backward. Silas Crow extended one pale hand. "Open it." Nathaniel looked at Agnes, then at Mrs. Bell. There was nowhere to hide the key, and no innocent explanation for possessing it. Slowly, he opened his fingers. The small brass key lay in the center of his palm. Crow smiled, as though the discovery had confirmed something he had known all along. "A junior footman found holding a key, stolen from a locked music cabinet," he said. "How unfortunate. I gave it to him," Agnes said before Nathaniel could speak. Mrs. Bell turned sharply toward her. "He did not steal anything." Crow lifted the key and examined it beneath the lamp. "Then perhaps you would explain how it came into your possession." "I found it while cleaning." "Where?" Agnes hesitated. Naming Mrs. Bell would place the housekeeper in danger and reveal that Monsieur Laurent had spoken to her. "In the ballroom." "That is a lie," Crow said. "The key was kept in Marquis Vale's private desk until this evening." Mrs. Bell's face changed, but she remained silent. Agnes knew the statement could not be true. Mrs. Bell had recognized the key and described the compartment it opened. It had once belonged to the housekeeper's ring, but Julian or Crow must have removed it recently. Crow was creating a version of events that would make anyone contradicting him appear guilty. "Search the maid first," he ordered. One guard stepped toward Agnes. Mrs. Bell immediately placed herself between them. "A male guard will not put his hands on a woman under my authority." "Your authority does not extend to theft. It extends to the dignity of every female servant in this house." For a moment, Agnes thought Crow might strike her. Instead, he gestured toward an elderly laundry maid who had appeared at the sound of raised voices. "Mrs. Turner will perform the search." Agnes followed Mrs. Turner into the linen room and emptied her apron pockets onto a table. A thimble, 2 hairpins, a small piece of soap, and the stained cloth she had used to wipe wine from her face. Mrs. Turner ran trembling hands along the seams of Agnes's uniform. From the inner fold of her apron, she pulled a tightly folded sheet of paper. Agnes stared at it. She had never seen it before. "Open it," Crow called from the doorway. Mrs. Turner unfolded the page. 4 bars of music had been copied across it. Several notes were crossed out and replaced with the same 4 alterations Agnes had seen in the ballroom. Beneath them, written in a clumsy hand, were the words, "Make him hear the changes." Agnes felt the trap close around her. Crow took the paper with theatrical care. "You told the Marquis the score had been altered. Now we find the alterations hidden in your clothing. That paper is not mine. It was inside your apron. Someone placed it there. When? While you were surrounded by witnesses?" Agnes thought back to Julian gripping her hair, Crow passing near her in the ballroom, and the confusion when Mrs. Bell wrapped the stained cloth around her shoulders. Any one of those moments could have concealed the movement. Yet the paper itself contained a mistake Crow had not expected her to notice. Along its lower edge was a faint watermark, a crowned raven enclosed by a circle. It belonged to the expensive stationery kept inside Julian's private study. Servants used rough, unmarked paper purchased in bulk. If Agnes mentioned the watermark now, Crow would destroy the page or replace it. She lowered her eyes. I cannot explain how it came to be there. Because there is only one explanation, Crow replied. You copied the composition, changed the notes, and persuaded this fool to steal the original before anyone could compare them. Nathaniel stepped forward. She did no such thing. One of the guards struck him across the mouth. Nathaniel staggered, his injured knee buckling beneath him. Agnes moved to help, but the second guard blocked her. Enough, Mrs. Bell said. Take the matter to Marquis Vale if you believe a crime has occurred. His lordship has already given his instructions. Crow turned to Nathaniel. You are dismissed without wages or reference. You will leave the estate before dawn. Nathaniel wiped blood from his lip. My sister will lose her place at the village school if I cannot pay the fees. Then perhaps you should have considered her before becoming a thief. Agnes felt the cruelty of the sentence more deeply than if it had been directed at her. Without a reference, Nathaniel would struggle to find another household willing to employ him. His sister's education would end, and the injury to his knee would make farm labor nearly impossible. Crow then looked at Agnes. You will be confined to the old serving pantry until tomorrow evening. At the concert, you will confess that you altered the music in a childish attempt to embarrass Marquis Vale. Afterward, you will be dismissed. And if I refuse, Nathaniel Brooks will be handed to the magistrate for theft. A prison workhouse is rarely kind to men with damaged legs. Nathaniel tried to protest, but Agnes met his eyes. I understand, she said. Crow folded the planted page and slipped it into the inside pocket of his black coat. Agnes watched carefully. The paper had moved from her apron to Mrs. Turner's hands, then directly into Crow's custody. And the watermark remained visible for a second, before disappearing beneath his lapel. She committed every detail to memory. The guards escorted Nathaniel toward the servants' entrance, while Agnes was marched in the opposite direction. As she passed him, she whispered, Do not resist. I won't let you confess to something you didn't do. Leave the estate. Protect your sister. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but there was no time for more. The old serving pantry stood at the end of a disused corridor beneath the western wing. Crow unlocked the door and pushed Agnes inside. The room contained empty shelves, a broken chair, and a narrow window too high to reach. You have always been praised for your quiet obedience, he said. It would be tragic if one night of arrogance destroyed 2 lives. Why are you afraid of 4 notes, Mr. Crow? His expression did not change, but his left hand flexed. I am afraid only of servants who mistake overheard music for knowledge. Then you should have no reason to threaten Nathaniel. Crow closed the door without answering. The key turned in the lock. Agnes waited until his footsteps faded before examining the room. The window was barred, the door was solid oak, and the walls offered no hidden opening. She sat on the broken chair and reconstructed the evening in her mind. The altered score, the ceremonial schedule, Crow's stained glove, the false note hidden in her apron, and Julian's desperate command to find Monsieur Laurent before midnight were not separate events. They were links in one deliberate chain. Someone intended Agnes to appear responsible for changing the composition before the ambassador heard it. If the concert ended in disaster, the disgraced maid would become the simplest explanation. Hours passed. The house above her gradually fell silent. Shortly before dawn, Agnes heard a faint scratching inside the wall behind the lowest shelf. She knelt and pressed her ear against the wood. The sound came again. 3 scratches, a pause, then 2 more. Agnes pulled at the shelf until one end shifted away from the wall. A narrow cavity appeared behind it. Inside lay a crushed pair of spectacles, a silver tuning fork, and a strip of cloth stained with blood. Agnes recognized the spectacles immediately. They belonged to Monsieur Laurent. Beneath them was a message scratched directly into the plaster. The 4th note is not for the orchestra. Before Agnes could examine it more closely, someone on the other side of the locked door whispered her name. Agnes, move away from the wall. It was Nathaniel. Then came the unmistakable smell of smoke. Agnes, move away from the wall. Nathaniel's warning was followed by the crash of metal against wood. Smoke pushed beneath the pantry door, in a thick gray ribbon, carrying the sharp odor of lamp oil. Agnes snatched Monsieur Laurent's spectacles, the blood-stained cloth and the silver tuning fork from the cavity. and wrapped them inside the stained cloth she still carried. The message scratched into the plaster remained visible. The fourth note is not for the orchestra. Another blow struck the door, but the oak barely moved. I cannot break the lock, Nathaniel called. The corridor is burning. Agnes looked toward the narrow window. Iron bars covered the opening, yet the glass panes above them were large enough to admit air. If the corridor fire consumed all the oxygen outside, that window might become her only source. She lifted the broken chair and smashed the glass. Cold pre-dawn air rushed inside, pulling smoke upward. Flames immediately flickered beneath the door as the new draft fed them. Agnes realized her mistake and dragged the heavy shelving unit across the floor, pressing it against the lower half of the door to block the flow. "Nathaniel, do not open it," she shouted. "The draft will pull the flames into the room. Then how do I get you out?" Agnes struck the wall with the tuning fork. Its clear tone vibrated through the plaster. She moved along the room, striking it again every few feet, and listening to the change in resonance. Most of the western wall returned a dull, solid sound. Near the corner, however, the note became deeper. There was a larger empty space behind it. Agnes remembered Mrs. Bell once mentioning that food had been carried from the old pantry through a service lift before the western wing was renovated. "There is a shaft behind the corner wall," she called. "Go through the laundry passage and find the old lifting mechanism." Nathaniel coughed. That passage was sealed years ago. Only from this side. The counterweight must still be in the laundry room. She heard him retreat through the smoke. Agnes pulled the bottom shelf away from the corner and found a rectangular outline beneath layers of faded wallpaper. There was no handle on her side. Flames climbed around the doorframe, blackening the wood. Heat pressed against her face, and the smoke grew dense enough to make her eyes water. She covered her mouth with the blood-stained cloth, then hesitated. If the stain belonged to Laurent, using it would risk destroying something important. She replaced it in her apron and tore a strip from the hem of her wine-soaked uniform instead. A chain rattled behind the wall. The concealed panel jerked upward 3 inches before becoming stuck. "Again!" Agnes shouted. Nathaniel strained against the old mechanism on the other side. The panel rose another foot, revealing a dark shaft wide enough for an old serving platform. Agnes dropped to her knees and forced her fingers beneath the warped wood. Her shoulders and back burned as she lifted with him. At last, the panel rose high enough for her to crawl beneath it, without twisting her body into the narrow opening. She entered the platform chamber and pulled the panel down, just as the pantry door burst inward. Fire consumed the abandoned room behind her. The shaft descended only 1 level. Nathaniel lowered the platform by releasing the rusted brake in short, violent movements, until Agnes reached the laundry room floor. She stepped out coughing, her face covered in soot, and found him leaning against the mechanism with blood running from his injured lip. "You were ordered to leave," she said. "The guards locked me in the stable office while they searched my belongings. I climbed through the feed hatch. You have made Crow's accusation look true. I smelled lamp oil before I reached the courtyard. Someone wanted that room burned with you inside it." A bell began ringing above them. Within seconds, servants filled the corridor carrying buckets. Agnes could hear panic spreading through the western wing. The flames had reached the paneling outside the pantry and were moving toward the old music archive. If the fire entered the wall cavities, it could travel unseen beneath the ballroom before anyone understood the danger. Mrs. Bell appeared through the smoke. "The household pump has lost pressure," she said. "The men cannot get enough water upstairs." Agnes remembered the renovation work completed during the previous summer. The new water line ran beside the servants' staircase, but the old pipe to the garden fountain had never been disconnected. During musical rehearsals, she had often heard the pipe vibrate whenever the gardeners opened the fountain valve. "Shut the ballroom line," Agnes said. "Open the fountain valve and attach the courtyard hose to the western outlet. It will force the full cistern through one pipe." Mrs. Bell did not ask how a maid could know this. She sent 2 footmen to the courtyard, while Agnes directed the bucket line away from the pantry and toward the wall beside the archive. Nathaniel climbed the servants' stairs despite his damaged knee and closed the ballroom valve. Water surged through the old pipe. Within minutes, the hose was strong enough to reach the burning paneling. Agnes then heard a faint crackling above the servants' passage and ordered everyone back seconds before a section of the ceiling collapsed. By sunrise, the fire was contained. The old pantry had been destroyed, but the archive, ballroom, and guest apartments remained intact. Agnes stood in the courtyard soaked with water and blackened by soot as the exhausted servants gathered around her. Even the head gardener admitted that without her instructions, the western wing would have burned to the roof. Then Julian Vale arrived in a clean riding coat. Silas Crowe followed him, displaying neither surprise nor disappointment at finding Agnes alive. Julian looked at the charred windows and turned toward the guests who had been awakened by the alarm. "The danger has passed," he announced. "I personally ordered the old fountain line opened and directed my servants to contain the fire before it reached the ballroom." Agnes stared at him. He had not entered the western wing until the last flame was extinguished. "That was Agnes's instruction," Nathaniel said loudly. Julian's smile vanished. "The dismissed thief appears to have returned." "He returned because someone set fire to the room where you imprisoned me," Agnes said. The courtyard became silent. Ambassador Petrov stood near the steps in a dark robe, watching Julian closely. Crowe moved forward. A lamp was found inside the pantry. The maid likely overturned it while attempting to escape. "There was no lamp inside," Agnes replied. "The fire began outside the door. The word of an accused saboteur against the evidence of this household." Julian faced the gathered guests. "Miss Whitmore's carelessness endangered every person under my roof. My intervention prevented tragedy, yet she now responds with another accusation." He ordered the guards to seize Nathaniel. When Agnes protested, Julian raised one hand. "You will make your confession at tonight's concert, or Mr. Brooks will be charged not only with theft, but with setting the fire." Pressure closed around Agnes's chest. Nathaniel had risked his freedom to save her, and now Julian was turning that courage into evidence of guilt. As the guards dragged him away, Nathaniel looked at her apron. Agnes understood. The objects from the hidden cavity were still concealed there. Julian had stolen credit for saving the house, but he did not know the fire had failed to destroy Laurent's message. Mrs. Bell led Agnes toward the kitchen while the guests returned inside. In the privacy of the linen room, Agnes unfolded the stained cloth. The spectacles and tuning fork were undamaged. On the handle of the tuning fork, beneath the dried blood, she discovered a line of engraved numbers. They were not a maker's mark. They matched the measure numbers containing the first 3 altered notes. The 4th number was different. It did not refer to any measure in the concerto. It referred to the exact minute Ambassador Petrov was scheduled to raise his glass for the ceremonial toast. Agnes read the engraved numbers again, while Mrs. Bell guarded the linen room door. The first 3 corresponded to measures in the altered composition. The final number, 9:45, matched the precise time printed beside Ambassador Petrov's ceremonial toast. It could not be coincidence. Monsieur Laurent had discovered the connection before he disappeared, then hidden his tuning fork and spectacles inside the old pantry. "We must show this to the ambassador," Agnes said. Mrs. Bell shook her head. "Julian controls every person allowed near him. Even Petrov's own guards have been moved. Then we reach one of the other diplomats. And tell them what? That 4 musical notes and a scratched message prove an assassination?" Mrs. Bell's voice softened. "I believe you, but belief is not evidence." Agnes rapped the tuning fork again. "The original score is evidence. If we compare it with the altered copy, we can prove the changes were deliberate. The cabinet survived the fire, but Crowe has posted a guard outside the music room." Mrs. Bell glanced toward the corridor. "I can create a distraction after the luncheon. You may have only a few minutes." Agnes spent the morning working under supervision in the kitchen. Although Julian had accused her of theft, sabotage, and starting the fire, he still expected her to prepare the house for his guests. She polished serving trays, carried coal and scrubbed soot from the western passage, while 2 guards followed her. Whenever servants came near, they lowered their eyes. Some had watched her save the house only hours earlier, but fear of losing their positions silenced them. Daisy stood beside the kitchen table with her injured hand wrapped in the linen Agnes had given her. Their eyes met, and the girl quickly looked away. Agnes did not blame her. Courage came easily to people who would not bear the punishment. Shortly before noon, a carriage arrived from the village. 2 constables entered Vale House with the local magistrate, Sir Malcolm Wren. Julian welcomed them in the entrance hall as though their visit had been expected. "Miss Whitmore," he called, "come forward." Agnes approached in her smoke-stained uniform. The diplomats and noble guests had gathered for luncheon. creating precisely the public audience Julian wanted. Nathaniel was brought in through another door with his hands tied. His injured knee had swollen badly, and dried blood marked his collar. Julian raised a small brown bottle for everyone to see. This was discovered beneath the mattress in Miss Whitmore's room. Agnes recognized the apothecary's label, but not the bottle. A red skull had been drawn across the glass. "The contents?" Sir Malcolm asked. "A concentrated tincture of aconite," Crow answered. "Enough to kill several men." Shocked whispers spread through the hall. Julian then produced the planted sheet of music. "We also found this concealed in her apron. The alterations correspond to 4 moments in tonight's program, including Ambassador Petrov's toast." He unfolded a second document. "And this was hidden beneath the same mattress as the poison." Sir Malcolm read it aloud. "At the 4th note, serve the marked glass. The foreigner must not leave Vale House alive." Agnes felt every face turned toward her. The note was written in the same deliberately clumsy hand as the message found in her apron. Julian had transformed her discovery into proof of her guilt. "I have never seen that letter or the bottle," she said. "Of course," Julian replied. "You also claimed never to have seen the copied music." Ambassador Petrov stepped out from among the guests. "Why would a maid wish to kill me?" "She may not be acting alone," Crow said. "Monsieur Laurent, the missing pianist, could have recruited her. Nathaniel Brooks then stole the cabinet key to help them destroy the original score." "The original score still exists," Agnes said. "Compare it with the pages on the piano." Julian's expression hardened. "Unfortunately, the oldest manuscript was destroyed in this morning's fire. The same fire Mr. Brooks started while attempting to free her." Agnes looked toward Mrs. Bell. The housekeeper appeared genuinely shaken. If Julian was telling the truth, their clearest means of proving the changes had vanished. "Nathaniel did not start the fire," Agnes said. "He saved my life. After you persuaded him to steal for you." Sir Malcolm unfolded another paper. "There is also the matter of Monsieur Laurent. Blood was found in his room, along with a torn piece of a grey servant's uniform." Agnes glanced down at the missing strip she had ripped from her hem while escaping the fire. The tear had occurred only hours after Laurent disappeared, but no one in that hall knew when it had been made. Crow must have noticed it and prepared another piece of matching cloth. "The uniform worn by every female servant in this household is grey," Agnes said. "But only yours is missing a strip," Julian replied. Sir Malcolm asked whether anyone could confirm Agnes had remained below stairs during the previous afternoon, when Laurent was last seen. Several servants had worked beside her, including Daisy. Yet none spoke. Julian looked toward the kitchen doorway. "Miss Cole, you assisted Agnes yesterday. Did she leave her station?" Daisy's burned hand trembled. Crow stood behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder. "She went upstairs," Daisy whispered. Agnes remembered going to the music room to return polished candlesticks. It had taken less than 10 minutes, but that truthful absence was all Julian needed. "Did she tell you why?" Sir Malcolm asked. Daisy swallowed. "No, sir." "Did you see Mr. Crow enter Agnes's room this morning?" Agnes asked suddenly. Daisy's eyes filled with tears. Crow's fingers tightened on her shoulder. "Answer her," Sir Malcolm said. Daisy looked at Agnes, then toward the doorway, where her sick mother had been brought from the village and seated under guard. "No," Daisy whispered. "I saw nothing." Agnes understood. Crow had learned about the medicine and threatened the one person Daisy could not abandon. Julian smiled with quiet satisfaction. "There will be no more interruptions." Sir Malcolm ordered Agnes's wrists bound. Ambassador Petrov objected that suspicion did not equal proof, but Julian reminded him that allowing an accused assassin to remain free would endanger every guest. Even Petrov's protest faded when the poison bottle was placed before him. Agnes was given no opportunity to inspect the false letter, question Crow, or explain Laurent's tuning fork. Nathaniel shouted that Julian was framing her, but a guard struck him in the stomach and dragged him away. "He goes to the county prison," Sir Malcolm said. "The maid will be confined in the old chapel until a closed hearing can be arranged." "No," Julian replied. "She will make her public confession first. My family's reputation requires it." Agnes was marched through the hall, while the guests stepped aside, as though her presence itself were poisonous. Mrs. Bell followed as far as the chapel passage. When the guards turned away, Agnes slipped the bundle containing Laurent's spectacles cloth, and tuning fork into the housekeeper's laundry basket. Mrs. Bell covered it without looking down. The chapel had not been used in years. Iron bars covered its windows, and the only door was guarded from outside. Agnes sat beneath the dusty altar, reconstructing the accusations. Julian had prepared evidence before the poison was supposedly discovered. He had also claimed the original score burned in a fire that failed to reach the archive. That lie meant the manuscript had either survived or been removed before the flames began. Late in the afternoon, music drifted from the ballroom as the final rehearsal commenced. Agnes counted each measure from memory. The first altered note sounded. Minutes later came the second, followed by the third. Then the orchestra reached the passage containing the supposed fourth alteration. But the piano remained silent. Laurent's message returned to her. The fourth note is not for the orchestra. A moment later, a single bell rang from somewhere inside the eastern gallery. It produced exactly the pitch that should have completed the sequence. Agnes rose slowly. The fourth note was not written for an instrument. It came from the antique service bell, connected to the ambassador's private room. Someone upstairs had just tested the entire signal. Then a folded paper slid beneath the chapel door. Agnes opened it and recognized Nathaniel's handwriting. They are not putting the poison in his wine. They are putting it on the piano keys. Agnes read Nathaniel's message twice before hiding it beneath the dusty altar cloth. Minutes later, the chapel door opened and Mrs. Bell entered, carrying a clean servant's uniform. A guard remained outside, preventing either woman from speaking freely. But as the housekeeper helped Agnes change, she whispered that Nathaniel had written the warning while being transported to the village. He had overheard one of Crow's guards mention coating 4 piano keys with the clear varnish. Nathaniel had slipped the message to a stable boy, who carried it back to Daisy. "Where is the tuning fork?" Agnes asked. "Hidden in my room with Laurent's spectacles and the cloth. Keep them separated from anything belonging to me. If Crow finds them among your possessions, he will create another accusation." Mrs. Bell fastened the final button of Agnes's uniform. "The concert begins in 20 minutes. Julian intends to make you confess before the ambassador's toast." Agnes looked toward the barred window. The sky had darkened, and carriage wheels rumbled continuously across the courtyard. Despite the fire, the missing pianist, and the alleged assassination plot, Julian had refused to cancel the evening. His determination confirmed that the concert itself was essential to whatever he planned. At 9:30, 2 guards escorted Agnes into the ballroom. More than 200 guests filled the room. Officers in ceremonial uniforms stood beside diplomats, politicians, and members of England's oldest families. The burned western corridor had been concealed behind velvet screens, and additional flowers had been arranged to hide the smell of smoke. At the front of the ballroom stood the black piano. Its polished surface reflected hundreds of candles. Ambassador Petrov waited beside it, dressed in a dark blue uniform decorated with silver braid. Julian raised his glass as Agnes was led into view. Conversations ceased. "Before our nations celebrate a new agreement," he announced, "this household must address an act of treachery." Agnes was positioned beside the piano like a prisoner awaiting sentence. Nathaniel was nowhere in sight. Crow stood near the eastern gallery wearing white gloves. "Miss Whitmore has confessed to altering tonight's music," Julian continued. "She acted with the assistance of a dismissed footman and the missing pianist, Monsieur Laurent." "I have confessed to nothing," Agnes said. A murmur swept across the room. Julian moved closer. "Choose your next words carefully. Mr. Brooks is already on his way to prison." Agnes looked toward Ambassador Petrov. "Your Excellency, do not touch this piano." Several guests gasped. Julian gave a short laugh. "Even now she attempts to disrupt the concert. 4 keys have been coated with something that does not belong on ivory." Julian's face remained composed, but Crow's gloved hand closed around the edge of the gallery curtain. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because Nathaniel heard your men discussing it." A convenient message from an imprisoned accomplice. Julian turned to the audience. "The poison discovered beneath her mattress was intended for Ambassador Petrov. When we found it, she created a new story to direct suspicion toward this house." Agnes stepped nearer the keyboard without touching it. She had polished those keys every morning for 9 years. Under the candlelight, 4 of them reflected a faint blue-white sheen absent from the others. They were positioned in the passage Petrov was scheduled to play before his toast. "Look at the keys," she said. "The surface is uneven." Crow moved quickly. "Do not allow her near the evidence." Two guards seized her arms. Agnes struggled, but they pulled her away. Ambassador Petrov approached the instrument. "Your Excellency, please," Agnes said. "Did you touch those keys during the afternoon rehearsal?" Petrov looked at her, then at his right hand. "Only briefly. Marquis Vale asked me to test the final passage." Julian's jaw tightened. "This is absurd." Petrov held his fingers beneath the light. The tips were slightly red. "I believed the ivory had been newly polished." "The keys were polished yesterday morning," Agnes said. "Nothing should have remained on them." The ambassador started to answer, but his hand suddenly closed around the edge of the piano. His face lost its color. A crystal glass slipped from his other hand and shattered across the floor. For a moment, he remained standing, as if sheer dignity might overpower whatever was happening inside his body. Then his knees buckled. Ambassador Petrov collapsed against the piano before falling onto the carpet. Screams erupted throughout the ballroom. Russian guards drew their weapons while English officers surged toward them, each group believing the other might be responsible. Guests rushed for the doors, overturning chairs and crushing flowers beneath their shoes. Julian shouted for everyone to remain calm, but panic had already escaped his control. Petrov's physician knelt beside him and examined his breathing. "His pulse is failing," he said. "Clear the room." Agnes tried to move toward the ambassador, but the guards tightened their grip. "The keys," she shouted. "Examine the 4 keys before anyone wipes them." Crow snatched a linen cloth from the piano and swept it across the keyboard. "There is nothing here," he said. Agnes watched him fold the cloth inward, so the contaminated surface could not be seen. He slipped it into his coat. "He just removed the substance," she said. "Search his pocket." "She is attempting to redirect blame," Crow replied. Julian pointed at the poison bottle displayed on a nearby table. "The substance found in her room has already done its work. Arrest her for the attempted murder of Ambassador Petrov." A Russian officer blocked the guards from moving. "No one leaves this room," he declared. "Until we know who attacked His Excellency, this estate is under diplomatic guard." The ballroom doors were closed and bolted. Outside, soldiers sealed the courtyard and stopped every departing carriage. The physician loosened Petrov's collar, while another doctor prepared smelling salts. The ambassador's hands had become rigid, and his breathing came in shallow, painful gasps. Julian approached the Russian officer. This woman possessed the poison, the altered music, and written instructions describing the attack. "Then she remains here," the officer said. "So do you." That command struck Julian harder than any accusation Agnes could have made. He had expected her arrest to end all questions. Instead, the ambassador's collapse had trapped every conspirator and witness inside the same room. Sir Malcolm Wren ordered Agnes placed beside the eastern wall under armed guard. Nathaniel was accused of applying the poison before his dismissal, while Laurent was named as the mastermind who had fled. Fearful guests repeated Julian's version, because it offered a simple answer. Only Mrs. Bell and Daisy refused to look at Agnes, as though she were a murderer. The physician worked on Petrov for several minutes, before announcing that the ambassador was alive but deteriorating. "We must identify the exact substance," he said. "The bottle found in the maid's room is labeled aconite, but his symptoms do not fully correspond. If another poison was used, the wrong treatment may kill him." Agnes looked at the piano. Crow had wiped the keys, but a single clear drop had fallen between 2 pieces of ivory and remained trapped in the narrow gap. Julian had not noticed it. Neither had the doctors. "There is still a sample inside the keyboard," Agnes said. Julian immediately stepped toward the piano. Before he could reach it, Ambassador Petrov's trembling hand caught the edge of Agnes's skirt. His eyes opened for only a second. "Laurent," he breathed. "Not missing." The effort caused his body to convulse. Agnes bent closer as the physician tried to pull her away. Petrov forced out 2 more words. "Inside, piano." Then he became motionless. "Inside the piano," Agnes repeated. The physician pressed 2 fingers against Ambassador Petrov's throat and announced that a pulse remained, though it was dangerously weak. Julian ordered the guards to remove Agnes, but Colonel Mikhail Orlov, commander of the Russian security detail, stepped between them. He had heard Petrov's final words. "The maid stays," he said. "Open the instrument. Your colonel cannot dismantle my property on the strength of a delirious man's whisper, Julian replied. Orlov drew his pistol and placed it on the piano. Then I will open it with a bullet. Julian yielded. Agnes knelt beside the instrument, careful not to touch the keyboard. She had cleaned the piano often enough to know that the lower front panel was secured by two brass catches beneath the frame. Crow had apparently never noticed them. Agnes released the catches and removed the panel, revealing the strings, pedals, and dark cavity beneath the soundboard. At first, there appeared to be nothing inside. Then Agnes saw that one strip of red felt had been pulled loose. Behind it was a narrow oilskin packet. Crow moved toward her, but Orlov raised his weapon. Agnes withdrew the packet and placed it on top of the piano. It contained the original handwritten score of the Vale Concerto, 3 pages of notes in Monsieur Laurent's handwriting, and a small envelope addressed to Ambassador Petrov. Julian's claim that the manuscript had been destroyed in the fire was now exposed as a lie. This proves nothing, he said. The maid could have placed it there herself. She has been guarded since before the concert, Orlov replied, and His Excellency knew it was hidden. Agnes opened Laurent's notes. The first page compared the original composition with the 4 alterations. The first 3 musical symbols were connected to movements within the ballroom, opening the eastern gallery, dismissing Petrov's nearest guard, and delivering the ceremonial glass. Beside the 4th symbol, Laurent had written only, "Bell at 9:45, final hand unknown." The second page listed 2 initials, SC and JV, but a large section had been torn away. The third contained a hurried message. I refused to perform after discovering the changes. Crow said the maid would be blamed because she remembers too much. If I cannot reach Petrov, the original must remain where music guards music. Agnes looked at Julian. You knew Laurent hid the manuscript. A terrified musician writes 2 sets of initials, and suddenly that becomes evidence against a marquise? Julian said. JV could refer to any number of people, but SC is more difficult to explain, Agnes replied. Crow's expression remained controlled. Monsieur Laurent and I argued. He may have written my initials out of spite. The physician asked for the poison sample. Agnes showed him the clear drop trapped between the keys. Using a narrow glass tube, he carefully collected it without allowing Crow near the instrument. He smelled it, mixed a small portion with liquid from his medical case, and watched the solution change color. This is not the tincture found beneath the maid's mattress, he said. It is a different preparation suspended in a clear resin. Contact with the skin could account for the ambassador's symptoms. The accusation against Agnes did not disappear, but its simplest foundation cracked. If the bottle in her room contained a different substance, then it had been planted, or the attack had involved more than one poison. Agnes remembered the watermark on the copied music. The sheet taken from my apron, she said. It was written on paper bearing the crowned raven mark used in Marquis Vale's study. Sir Malcolm turned toward Crow. Where is that sheet now? Crow reached into his coat and produced it. Agnes watched his face carefully as the magistrate held the page toward a candle. The watermark appeared along the lower edge exactly as she remembered. Servants do not have access to this stationery, Mrs. Bell said from the edge of the crowd. Only Marquis Vale and Mr. Crow possess keys to the private study. Julian's composure faltered. Any servant could steal a sheet of paper. Then your household appears remarkably easy to rob, whenever evidence is required against me, Agnes said. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, they were no longer looking at her as a convicted murderer. They were looking at Julian. The ballroom doors opened under Russian guard, and Nathaniel was brought inside. His prison carriage had been stopped at the estate gates when Orlov sealed the grounds. Nathaniel's hands remained bound, but his voice was clear. He identified the guard he had overheard discussing the varnish. The man denied everything until Orlov ordered his gloves removed. A sticky, transparent residue remained on the right thumb. Mr. Crow gave me a jar, the guard finally admitted. He said it was polish. He ordered me to wipe the marked keys and say nothing. Which keys? Sir Malcolm asked. 4 keys marked with chalk beneath the keyboard. Crow stepped away from the piano. A servant's claim made under threat from foreign soldiers cannot be trusted. Neither can evidence repeatedly found in the maid's clothing and room after passing through your hands, Agnes replied. Daisy suddenly pushed through the servants gathered near the door. Her burned hand was still bandaged, and her mother stood behind her. The girl's face was wet with tears. Mr. Crow entered Agnes's room before the poison was discovered, she said. I saw him come out carrying an empty bottle. He threatened to stop the apothecary from treating my mother if I spoke. Crow stared at her with quiet hatred. Daisy trembled but did not withdraw her statement. Agnes realized the courage had cost the girl everything she believed protected her family. Mrs. Bell then brought Laurent's tuning fork, spectacles and blood-stained cloth from her room. The engraved numbers matched the first 3 measures and the time of the 4th signal. The spectacles established that Laurent had reached the pantry before disappearing. His blood on the cloth suggested violence, but it did not reveal whether he was dead, imprisoned, or hiding somewhere inside the estate. Hope moved cautiously through the room. The evidence proved the score had been altered deliberately, that Crow's guard had coded the keys, and that the papers used to frame Agnes came from Julian's study. Yet the central questions remained unanswered. Who had prepared the poison? Where was Laurent? What was supposed to happen when the final bell rang? The clock above the fireplace chimed the quarter hour. Agnes looked at its hands. It was 9:44. The 4th signal has not sounded yet, she said. The bell we heard during rehearsal was only a test. Julian glanced toward the eastern gallery. It was a small movement, but Agnes saw it. So did Orlov. The colonel ordered 2 soldiers to guard the balcony, and another to protect the ambassador. At exactly 9:45, the antique service bell rang from Petrov's private room. Every candle in the eastern gallery went out at once. A gunshot thundered from behind the velvet curtain. Guests screamed and dropped to the floor. When the candles were relit, Colonel Orlov was unharmed, and Petrov still lay beneath the physician's care. But Silas Crow had vanished. So had the oilskin packet containing the original score, Laurent's notes, and every piece of evidence Agnes had just uncovered. Colonel Orlov ordered every door sealed, but the darkness had lasted long enough for Silas Crow to reach the narrow servants' stair behind the eastern curtain. The gunshot had been fired into the ceiling, scattering plaster across the gallery without striking anyone. When the candles were restored, the oilskin packet was gone from the piano. The physician still possessed the small poison sample, but Julian immediately challenged its origin, arguing that Agnes could have contaminated the keyboard herself before the concert. Laurent's original manuscript and written testimony had been the only evidence connecting the altered score directly to Julian and Crow. Without them, the accusation could once again be reduced to the word of a maid against that of a marquis. Orlov sent soldiers through the servants' passages, while Sir Malcolm searched the ballroom. Agnes remained beside the eastern wall under guard, forced to watch Julian rebuild his authority. Crow has revealed himself as the leader of this conspiracy, Julian told the guests. He recruited Laurent, the maid and the dismissed footman. When his scheme failed, he stole the false documents they intended to use against me. Those documents were hidden by Laurent before he disappeared, Agnes said. Crow stole them because they implicated both of you. Julian faced her with an expression of wounded dignity. You expect this room to believe that my secretary and I planned an attack in my own home, then left evidence inside my own piano. You did not know Laurent had hidden it there. And conveniently, the only papers supporting your claim have vanished. The guests who had briefly doubted Julian began retreating toward the safer explanation, believing a respected marquis capable of attempted murder would threaten every social rule by which they lived. Believing a servant guilty required nothing from them. A Russian soldier returned from the eastern passage carrying Crow's white glove. It had been found beside an open door leading toward the old clock tower. The transparent poison residue remained on its fingertips, but the cloth from the piano keys was missing. Julian seized upon the discovery. Crow handled the poison. The maid supplied it. Their connection is proven. Daisy tried to protest, but Sir Malcolm warned that another unsupported accusation could result in her arrest. Mrs. Bell demanded that Julian explain why he had lied about the original score burning in the fire. He answered by dismissing her from service in front of the entire household. You concealed stolen objects and assisted a suspected assassin, he said. Leave Vale House before sunrise. Mrs. Bell removed the ring of household keys from her waist and placed it on the floor at his feet. I served your father for 24 years, she said. He would be ashamed of the man carrying his name. Julian kicked the keys aside. 2 soldiers then returned from the clock tower. Between them, they carried Silas Crow's body. A bullet had entered his chest at close range. A pistol remained clutched in his right hand. In his coat pocket, Sir Malcolm found several burned fragments from Laurent's original manuscript and a signed confession. According to the letter, Crowe had promised Agnes and Nathaniel money in exchange for helping him assassinate Petrov. He claimed Laurent had prepared the altered music, but lost his nerve, forcing Crowe to silence him. Finally, Crowe wrote that he had stolen the packet during the darkness and destroyed it before taking his own life. The confession gave Julian everything he required: a dead culprit, an explanation for the missing pianist, and a renewed case against Agnes. "The matter is finished," Julian declared. Crowe's acted out of greed, with the assistance of servants who believed they would escape suspicion. "He did not kill himself," Agnes said. Sir Malcolm held up the signed letter. "His confession was found on his body. His body was arranged. On what evidence?" Agnes looked at the pistol in Crowe's right hand. Something about it disturbed her, but the answer remained just beyond reach. Before she could identify it, Petrov's physician called for assistance. The ambassador's breathing had worsened. Orlov's attention shifted from the investigation to saving the man he had sworn to protect. A carriage was prepared to transport Petrov to a military hospital in London, but the journey would take several hours over rough roads. The physician warned that Petrov might not survive it. Julian insisted that the poisoned Maid be removed before the ambassador departed. Sir Malcolm ordered Agnes confined in the stone wine cellar until constables could take her to county prison. Nathaniel would face charges of theft, arson, and conspiracy. Daisy and her mother were expelled from the estate, and every servant was warned that supporting Agnes would cost them their position. As the guards led her from the ballroom, Agnes looked for Laurent's tuning fork. It lay beneath the piano, where someone had dropped it during the panic. She could not reach it without attracting attention. Before she passed Nathaniel, she allowed her gaze to move once from him to the instrument. He followed the movement and gave the smallest nod. The stone wine cellar was colder than the chapel and had no window. The guards chained one of Agnes's wrists to an iron ring fixed in the wall. For the first time since Julian poured wine over her head, exhaustion overwhelmed her restraint. Nathaniel was facing prison because he had helped her. Daisy had lost her home after finding the courage to speak. Mrs. Bell had surrendered 24 years of service. Monsieur Laurent might already be dead. Ambassador Petrov was dying, and the evidence capable of exposing Julian had been reduced to ashes. Agnes sat on the floor and allowed herself to weep. She did not cry because aristocrats had mocked her body, or because Julian had treated her kindness as weakness. She cried because every person who had chosen to stand beside her had paid a greater price than she had. Hours seemed to pass before footsteps stopped outside the cellar. Agnes expected another interrogation, but no one opened the door. Instead, something small rolled beneath the narrow gap and struck her shoe. It was Laurent's silver tuning fork. Nathaniel whispered from the other side. "I slipped away while they moved Crowe's body. I have less than a minute." Agnes lifted the instrument. One side of its base had been loosened. She twisted it, revealing that the handle was hollow. Inside was a tightly rolled strip of paper, no wider than her finger. Before she could remove it, guards shouted at the end of the corridor. Nathaniel ran. Agnes closed the handle and hid the tuning fork inside the torn lining of her skirt. The cellar became silent again. She thought of Crowe's body, the pistol in his right hand, and the ink that had repeatedly stained his left glove. Then she remembered 9 years of delivering his written orders throughout Vale House. Silas Crowe had always written, sealed letters, and handled delicate objects with his left hand. Julian had placed the pistol in the wrong hand. Crowe's suicide was murder. More importantly, Julian had made one other mistake. He believed burning Laurent's pages had destroyed what they contained. He had forgotten that Agnes needed to hear or read something only once to remember it. She could reproduce every word, every measure, and every number Laurent had written. Agnes wiped the tears from her face. Her gentle expression did not disappear, but grief hardened into controlled resolve. Julian expected a frightened maid to kneel and confess before sunrise. Instead, she would make him repeat his lies where every surviving witness could hear them. And this time, she would decide the music. The strip hidden inside Laurent's tuning fork contained no written confession. It held a miniature floor plan, drawn in faded blue ink. Agnes recognized the outline of the eastern gallery. the service bell shaft, and the abandoned priest stair sealed during the renovation of Vale House. A small cross marked a chamber between the clock tower and the old family chapel. Beneath it, Laurent had written, "If they search the roads, remain where the fourth bell cannot be heard." Agnes memorized the route and returned the paper to the hollow handle. Shortly before dawn, Colonel Orlov ordered her brought back to the ballroom. Ambassador Petrov had become too unstable to survive the journey to London, and his physician needed the attack reconstructed before attempting further treatment. Julian objected, but Orlov reminded him that Russian soldiers still controlled every exit. Agnes agreed to appear under 3 conditions. Daisy and her mother would remain under military protection. Mrs. Bell would not be removed from the estate, and Nathaniel would be brought into the ballroom alive, rather than handed to Julian's guards. "An accused servant does not dictate terms," Julian said. "Then the accused servant has nothing more to say," Agnes replied. Orlov accepted. Before entering the ballroom, Agnes privately showed him the floor plan inside the tuning fork. He sent 2 soldiers and Mrs. Bell toward the abandoned priest's stair. Agnes then asked Sir Malcolm for blank paper, a pen, and 3 witnesses from the orchestra. Using only her memory, she reproduced every measure of the original Vale concerto, followed by Laurent's complete notes, comparing it with the altered version. She made 3 copies of the crucial passages, one for Orlov, one for Sir Malcolm, and one for Ambassador Petrov's physician. Julian could no longer destroy the evidence by stealing a single packet. At sunrise, the surviving guests, servants, diplomats and officers assembled again beneath the chandeliers. The shattered glass had been removed, but Petrov's bloodless figure remained on a couch near the piano. Nathaniel stood under Russian guard, his wrists unbound. Daisy held her mother's hand beside Mrs. Bell's empty chair. Julian approached Agnes, carrying Crow's confession. "This is your final opportunity," he said. "Kneel. Admit your part in the conspiracy, and beg the crown for mercy." Agnes remained standing. Her full figure was still dressed in a servant's gray uniform stained by wine, smoke, and cellar dust. She looked exhausted, but no longer defeated. "Read the confession aloud," she said. Julian smiled. Gladly. He read Crow's supposed admission that he recruited Agnes, Nathaniel, and Laurent, altered 4 notes in the score, prepared the poison, and fired the distracting shot before taking his own life. When Julian finished, Agnes asked Sir Malcolm to examine the pistol recovered from Crow's hand. "Mr. Crow wrote every household order with his left hand," she said. "The ink stains repeatedly found on his left cuff confirm it. Yet the pistol was placed in his right hand." Julian shrugged. "A desperate man may use either hand." Then asked the physician about the wound. Petrov's doctor examined Crow's body, which remained covered near the gallery. "The bullet traveled downward through the chest," he said. "For Crow to inflict such a wound with his right hand, he would have needed to hold the pistol at an unnatural angle. Powder marks are also absent from his glove. I do not believe he fired the weapon." Uneasy voices spread through the ballroom. Agnes continued. "Crow was murdered after stealing the packet. The confession was placed on his body to blame servants who could be silenced." "By whom?" Julian demanded. "By someone who needed Crow dead before he could name the person above him." Julian laughed. "Your memory has become a theater in which you are always the heroine. My memory is the reason you tried to burn me alive." Agnes handed her reconstruction to the 3 orchestra members. Each confirmed that the version she had written matched the composition performed at Vale House in previous years. The altered score contained only 3 changed notes. The 4th signal had been produced by Petrov's service bell. Yet Crow's confession states that he altered 4 notes in the score, Agnes said. The person who wrote this letter did not understand the difference between the music and the signal. Julian's voice sharpened. Crow used the word score to describe the entire plan. A convenient interpretation from a man who claims to know nothing about it. Agnes next asked Sir Malcolm to hold the planted sheet from her apron against the candlelight. The crowned raven watermark appeared. She produced the false letter allegedly found with the poison bottle. It bore the same mark. "Both pieces of evidence used against me came from Marquis Vale's private stationery," she said. "Mr. Crow may have planted them, but only 2 men possessed keys to the study." "Crow stole my paper," Julian replied. "He also stole the poison, changed the music, and manipulated half the servants in this house." Death has made him remarkably useful to you." A few guests murmured in agreement. Julian's face reddened. He pointed toward Agnes's body with open contempt. "Look at her. A bloated servant stuffed into a uniform, pretending that overheard melodies make her equal to the people in this room. You are allowing her to turn imagination into evidence because you enjoy the spectacle." The old humiliation no longer produced laughter. Even the woman in the silver gown lowered her eyes. Agnes rested one hand on the piano. "You poured wine over me because you believed shame would make me forget what I heard. You threatened Nathaniel because you believed loyalty could be purchased with fear. You endangered Daisy's mother because you believed poor people love less courageously than rich ones. Every choice you made depended upon servants being too frightened or too foolish to remember." Julian stepped close. "And still you cannot connect me to Crow's actions. Then answer one question. Did you enter the old clock tower after the ballroom went dark?" "No." "Did you touch Crow's pistol?" "No." "Did you know where his body would be found?" "I learned it when the soldiers returned." Agnes watched him commit himself to each denial. "And you have never entered the chamber behind the service bell shaft." Julian's eyes flickered. "There is no chamber behind it. The wall is solid." Agnes had not described its location publicly. Only the floor plan inside the tuning fork showed that the chamber lay behind the bell shaft. "How do you know which wall I mean?" she asked. Julian's mouth tightened. "I own this house." "Then you will also know that the priest's stair reaches the chamber without passing through the clock tower." Movement sounded beyond the ballroom doors. Julian turned toward it. Colonel Orlov's soldiers entered first. Mrs. Bell followed, supporting a thin man whose coat was torn and whose temple was crusted with dried blood. A stunned whisper moved through the crowd. Monsieur Laurent was alive. One of Julian's guards was brought in behind him in chains. Laurent raised his bruised face and pointed directly at the Marquis. "He ordered Crow to kill me," the pianist said, "and I know why the ambassador was never meant to survive this house." Julian laughed, but the sound died without support from the room. A frightened musician, rescued from a hidden chamber, will say anything his rescuers demand. Monsieur Laurent pulled away from Mrs. Bell and stood without assistance. "I entered that chamber by choice, after Crow attacked me in the music archive. I remained there because I knew Julian's men were searching every road leaving the estate." He explained that Ambassador Petrov had discovered Julian's secret investment in a failing weapons company. Julian had mortgaged Vale House and borrowed enormous sums to manufacture rifles for factions opposed to the diplomatic agreement Petrov intended to sign. If peace was secured, the contracts would become worthless, and Julian would lose his estate. If the Russian ambassador died on English soil, however, the agreement would collapse, military tensions would rise, and Julian's weapons shares would increase in value. Petrov also carried documents proving Julian bribed officials to move those weapons across the border, Laurent said. He intended to hand them to a minister after his toast. Julian stepped toward him. Colonel Orlov immediately raised his pistol. "Remain where you are," Laurent continued. Crow had ordered him to perform the altered concerto. The first note signaled a servant to unlock the eastern gallery. The second caused Petrov's closest guard to be reassigned. The third instructed Julian's man to deliver the ceremonial glass, directing everyone's attention toward the wine. The fourth signal did not belong to the orchestra. At precisely 9:45, the service bell was meant to extinguish the gallery lights and tell an armed guard to fire if the poison on the piano keys had failed. The wine was a deception, Agnes said. Everyone was supposed to search the glass, while the real poison remained on the ivory. Petrov's physician confirmed that the clear resin collected from between the keys matched the residue on the captured guard's glove. Soldiers had also recovered a jar of the same substance from the hidden chamber. Its label identified the apothecary and preparation, allowing the physician to begin the correct treatment. Laurent explained that Petrov had touched the coded keys during the afternoon rehearsal. The substance acted slowly enough for his collapse to occur during the concert, when Agnes would already be presented as an assassin. The poison bottle, copied music and false instruction letter had been planted in her room and clothing to create a complete but fraudulent chain of evidence. "Why choose Agnes?" Sir Malcolm asked. Julian remained silent. Laurent answered for him, because she heard the altered passage during rehearsal and recognized it. Crow told me she had memorized the concerto. Once she spoke, They needed to make every discovery she revealed look like part of her own plot. Agnes looked across the ballroom at the people who had laughed when Julian poured wine over her head. "My body, my uniform, and my position made me convenient," she said. He believed no one would accept that a plus-size maid understood music better than the men seated around his piano. Julian's face twisted. "Understanding music does not make you a lady." "No," Agnes replied, "but being born a marquis did not make you a decent man." Silence descended beneath the chandeliers. Laurent then described hiding the original score and his notes inside the piano. Before taking refuge, he concealed the floor plan inside his tuning fork and placed his spectacles in the pantry cavity to show Mrs. Bell where he had gone. He had struck the bell pipe 3 times and then twice, hoping someone familiar with musical patterns would investigate the wall. Agnes had followed that clue before the fire nearly killed her. "Crow found the oilskin packet during the blackout," Laurent said, but Julian never intended to let him leave with it. Colonel Orlov pushed the captured estate guard forward. The man's face was gray with fear. He admitted that Julian had ordered him to wait behind the eastern curtain. When Crow entered the passage carrying the packet, the guard shot him, dragged his body into the clock tower, and placed the pistol in his right hand. Julian had already prepared the false confession. "He ordered me to burn the manuscript and kill Laurent before dawn," the guard said. "I found the hidden chamber, but the Russian soldiers reached me before I could do it." Julian lunged toward the man. 2 officers seized him and forced him to his knees beside Crow's covered body. The room that had once laughed at a maid now watched a marquis struggle helplessly against the law. Julian shouted that a servant's reconstruction could not replace the destroyed manuscript. Agnes walked to the piano and placed her copied composition on its stand. Then asked the orchestra. One by one, the musicians played the passages she had reproduced from memory. Each matched the burned fragments recovered from Crow's pocket. The paper watermark connected the planted accusations to Julian's study. Daisy's testimony placed Crow inside Agnes's room. Nathaniel identified the order to coat the keys. The physician authenticated the poison. Laurent explained the altered score. The captured guard confirmed Julian's command. No single witness carried the entire truth, but together, they formed a chain Julian could neither break nor burn. Sir Malcolm formally ordered his arrest for conspiracy to murder Ambassador Petrov, the murder of Silas Crow, the attempted murder of Laurent, destruction of evidence, and the deliberate framing of Agnes and Nathaniel. Julian's debts and illegal weapons contracts were seized for examination. Before the guards took him away, he looked up at Agnes. Wine stains still marked her uniform, and soot remained beneath her fingernails. "You were nothing when you entered this house," he said. Agnes met his gaze. "I entered it as a maid who worked honestly. That was always more than you deserved from me." By mid-morning, Petrov's breathing stabilized. The physician warned that his recovery would take weeks, but the ambassador would live. Nathaniel was cleared of every accusation. Daisy's mother received treatment under Petrov's protection, and Mrs. Bell was asked to resume temporary authority over Vale House until the courts determined its future. Julian's property was eventually sold to satisfy his debts and compensate the servants whose wages he had withheld. A portion of the estate became a school of music for children, whose families could never have afforded lessons. Agnes was offered its first position as resident director, but she refused to erase the work that had shaped her life. She accepted only on the condition that she remain listed as a former household maid, and that domestic servants could attend every class without charge. Nathaniel became the school's administrator. Daisy trained as an apothecary's assistant, and Mrs. Bell governed the residents with the same discipline she had always possessed. Months later, Ambassador Petrov returned for the school's opening concert. Before the performance, he invited Agnes to sit at the piano. The aristocrats in attendance rose instead of laughing. Agnes remained visibly full-figured, quiet, and gentle-faced, the same woman Julian had mistaken for weak. She played the original concerto without changing a single note. When the final chord faded, Petrov poured 2 glasses of wine and offered one to her with a respectful bow. Agnes accepted it, then placed it safely beside the piano. This time, no one asked her to kneel.